You don't want something reckless. You don't want to destroy your life or burn everything down. You just want something different. And somehow, that quiet desire comes with guilt. Guilt for wanting more. Guilt for wanting less. Guilt for wanting something that doesn't quite match the version of you everyone recognizes. You tell yourself you should be grateful. You tell yourself nothing is really wrong, but the guilt doesn't go away, and you don't fully understand why. It usually starts quietly, a passing thought during a normal day. A moment of restlessness in a life that technically works. You're doing what you're supposed to do. Meeting expectations, being responsible, not causing problems. And yet, there's a background tension, a sense that the life you're living isn't wrong, but isn't fully yours either. You notice it when you imagine an alternative version of your life. A different path, a different pace, a different role. And immediately, something tightens inside. Not fear, not excitement, guilt. You think about the people who supported you, the sacrifices that were made, the version of you that others depend on. You think about how changing direction would confuse people, disappoint them, or quietly unsettle the balance you've worked hard to maintain. So you minimize the desire. You call it a phase. You tell yourself to be realistic. You remind yourself that wanting something different doesn't mean you should act on it. Slowly, the desire turns inward. It becomes self-criticism. Why can't I just be content? Why am I like this? Other people would be grateful. Over time, this guilt shapes how you see yourself. You become cautious with your own wants. You second-guess your instincts. You hesitate before naming what you actually want out loud. Not because you don't know, but because knowing feels dangerous. Psychologically, this doesn't stay contained. It affects decisions. You delay choices. You overthink commitments. You stay longer than you should in situations that feel misaligned. In relationships, you downplay your preferences. You adapt. You accommodate. You become reasonable. But internally, something keeps pulling. A quiet signal that says, this isn't it. And every time that signal appears, the guilt answers faster. This pattern isn't random. It's not a moral failure. It's not selfishness. And it's not ingratitude. It's an identity conflict. And it's more common than people realize. Here's the part most people never hear. That guilt didn't come from nowhere. It didn't appear because something is wrong with you. It formed for a reason. From a psychological standpoint, guilt isn't just an emotion. It's a social regulator. Its job is to keep you connected, predictable, and safe within your environment. At some point in your life, often early, you learn something important. Belonging required consistency. Safety required being understandable. Love required staying recognizable. So your brain adapted. It learned to associate change with risk, not physical danger, but relational danger. Loss of approval, loss of stability, loss of your role. This adaptation is especially strong in people who are praised for being mature early, who learned to be dependable, who took emotional responsibility too soon, or who were valued for being low maintenance. In those environments, wanting something different didn't feel neutral. It felt disruptive. So your nervous system protected connection by attaching guilt to desire. This isn't a flaw. It's a survival strategy that worked. The problem is, you're no longer in the same psychological environment, but your brain hasn't updated the rules yet. Your brain is constantly negotiating between two systems. One tracks attachment and belonging. The other tracks identity and agency. Early in life, attachment comes first. Before you can ask who you are, your brain asks whether you're safe with others. So it builds a mental map. If I act this way, I stay connected. If I want that, I risk disruption. Over time, this becomes automatic. Desire triggers evaluation, and evaluation triggers emotion. The guilt shows up before conscious thought. Imagine your identity as a room you've lived in for years. It's familiar, predictable. Other people know where everything is. Wanting something different is like moving one piece of furniture, not demolishing the room, just shifting one thing. But your brain reacts as if the whole structure might collapse, because stability once depended on keeping everything exactly where it was. This is reinforced by the brain's preference for identity consistency. The mind would rather keep a stable self-story than allow uncertainty, even if the new story fits better. So when a desire threatens that story, the brain creates friction. Guilt is that friction. Not to punish you, but to slow you down. The result is that you don't feel excited about change. You feel disloyal. Disloyal to your past self. Disloyal to the people who know you this way. Disloyal to the version of you that made sense. Most people assume guilt means don't go there. But psychologically, guilt often means something else. It means something old is being questioned. And old things resist being questioned. Once you stop treating guilt like a verdict, you notice something underneath it. Fatigue. A quiet tiredness that doesn't come from effort, but from containment. From holding yourself in a shape that once made sense, but no longer fits. This is identity fatigue, and it explains why guilt grows over time instead of fading. When a desire is ignored, the brain doesn't erase it. It keeps it running in the background, like an app you never close. This creates cognitive load. Your mental energy isn't just spent living your life, it's spent monitoring yourself, editing thoughts, downplaying impulses before they reach language. Over time, this monitoring becomes exhausting, but because nothing is visibly wrong, the exhaustion feels unjustified, so it turns inward. I shouldn't feel this way. Other people have it worse. This isn't a real problem. That internal invalidation strengthens guilt. Not because the desire is selfish, but because your nervous system is burning energy to contain it. This is also why gratitude sometimes makes it worse. Gratitude stabilizes what exists. Desire activates exploration and agency. When gratitude is used to silence desire, the brain experiences internal conflict, not harmony. You can be deeply appreciative and deeply misaligned at the same time. Those states don't cancel each other out. The deeper conflict isn't between wanting and having. It's between identity loyalty and identity accuracy. Loyalty says stay consistent. Accuracy asks whether this still fits. Guilt appears when loyalty overrides accuracy, especially for people whose worth was tied to being dependable or emotionally easy. You learned that being understood was safer than being fully expressed. So when accuracy pulls you away from loyalty, the brain flags it as a threat. Not because growth is dangerous, but because unpredictability once was. Your brain runs on emotional contracts. Agreements like, if I'm this way, I stay loved. Desire threatens these contracts, not because it's dramatic, but because it introduces renegotiation. And renegotiation requires uncertainty. The brain hates uncertainty more than dissatisfaction, so it uses guilt to slow you down. Not forever, just enough to protect the old agreement. This is why resolution doesn't come from fighting guilt. It comes from updating the contract, slowly, through evidence. When you notice guilt, you separate wanting from acting. You recognize the guilt appears before any decision is made. That calms the threat response. You ask who the guilt is loyal to. Not in theory, but specifically. Guilt is relational. Once named, it softens. You distinguish harm from discomfort. Most guilt is about emotional adjustment, not real danger. You allow desire to exist without translating it into a plan. Desire becomes information, not a threat. And slowly, the nervous system learns it's safe to notice. The mistake many people make is acting too fast. Sudden change triggers the brain's error detection system. If action outpaces identity, guilt returns stronger. The brain learns danger instead of permission. That's why integration matters more than courage. Identity updates through small, repeated confirmations, not dramatic declarations. Instead of becoming someone else, you expand who you're allowed to be. You make micro-claims. I'm someone who can want this too. Each small allowance teaches the brain that connection remained intact, safety remained intact, and movement happened. Here's the model to keep. Guilt isn't a stop sign, it's a checkpoint. It appears when desire outgrows an old identity. Your task isn't to obey it or ignore it, but to understand what it's protecting. When identity updates slowly, guilt doesn't need to shout. It steps aside. There is nothing wrong with you for wanting something different. It doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It doesn't mean you're unstable. It doesn't mean you're betraying anyone. It means the version of you that once held everything together has done its job. And another version is asking for space. You don't need to rush toward it. You don't need to justify it. You only need to stop treating the desire as a threat. Because guilt fades not when you silence what you want, but when your identity finally has room to hold it.